Welcome to Money Market, a Bank of Tampa podcast. We highlight the businesses, expert business advice, local economy, and points of interest in the Tampa Bay market. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your finer podcasts. And please share this episode with a friend or colleague. I'm your host, Owen Lefebvre, the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. Today, we are joined by a TikTok sensation, Attorney Jason Sampson, Esquire, who is the founder and partner of Venerable Law, to talk about asset protection strategies. So Jason has been practicing law for 24 years. He's a member of the Massachusetts Bar. So I believe that makes you a masshole, as they say.
I believe so.
And also a member of the Florida Bar. Jason has previous experience working for one of the top 10 law firms in the world and worked for some of the biggest corporations around the world. And I recall you doing some work in the Middle East too, right?
Yeah, we were on a project very near and dear to the bank's heart, anti-money laundering for a couple of years there in the Middle East. So good times.
So he is the founder of Venerable Law, which focuses on a wide array of business matters, and the co-founder of Fortress Asset Protection, which will probably make up the majority of the conversation we're going to have today. So Jason focuses on building long-term relationships with his clients to structure their affairs for success. Proud to be considered a trusted advisor to many business owners, entrepreneurs, and family businesses, as well as to myself. Jason and I have a long friendship as well as a professional relationship that dates back, probably going close to 2 decades. So Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So what is asset protection and why is it important?
So asset protection is really just a series of strategies to make sure that your stuff is protected, right? So it's a combination of business law, combination of estate planning, anonymity planning, and just making sure that what you are doing from a structuring standpoint is done from the idea that a creditor may come one day. And I think many people, unfortunately, one of the things that I've seen here in Florida, it's a very user-friendly, very DIY-friendly market where, most people can go on Sunbiz or the Secretary of State website and register a company and they think they're off to the races, and they don't have an EIN, they don't have an operating agreement, they don't have any of the bells and whistles that an attorney would be looking to if they ever came into issues.
So you're telling me again, you can't use LegalZoom and we're good?
So this is not necessarily a bash on LegalZoom, but if you're looking at things from an asset protection standpoint, I can assure you that's not where you want to go.
And so we're not bashing LegalZoom. I mean, there are some very simple documents on LegalZoom that are very good, but
And to be clear, I've actually given the DIY advice to clients. Like when people come to me, like, listen, I just need something super simple, quick, and easy, and it's only going to be me and my husband or whatever it is. Like, okay, well, as long as you understand the framework of what you are dealing in and you're okay with that risk exposure, not setting them up for failure or anything like that, I oftentimes will give them like, maybe you should, seek the DIY version or...
This feels like the Geico commercial where the guy calls his doctor and is like, okay, take out the knife, make an incision, 3 inches. And he's like, shouldn't you be doing this?
Yeah.
you don't...
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is very interesting too, because it's like, they may not necessarily need my help at that point in time, but you definitely understand that at a future date they might. And whether it's cost, whether it's understanding the risk exposure, whether or not they're ready for the advice at that point in time, sometimes you just kind of have to pass them forward of, listen, here's a DIY version. Come see me in 6 months when you've kind of understand the frame of reference that you're in. And But yeah, I do feel much more akin to that analogy that you just gave, because oftentimes people just don't know what they don't know. So
how often do people call and just want basically free legal advice? So, I'm a banker, so I'm salaried for the most part, not being paid by the hour, but you get paid by the hour for your advice and expertise. Do you feel that people try to avoid it and just call and...
I don't think so. We call those tire kickers. Okay. We don't get too many tire kickers. I think we've put enough content out there that I think a lot of their kind of easier questions have been answered in social media and videos and things like that. We'll get a fair amount of tire kickers of, looking for price and things like that, which is fine. I mean,
sure.
Everybody's always on a budget, and, we're certainly not the most cheapest, certainly not the most expensive. I think, we're certainly reasonably priced. Most everything we do now is actually on a flat fee, not too much hourly work. So we don't necessarily mind, giving some free advice here and there. I think that's kind of paying it forward and also building credibility with someone that might need you in the future too. So sometimes they call with super easy questions, and I can, set them off on their own in about 10 minutes. And I think I've done my good deed for the day, and, we move on to the next one. So
good Samaritan.
Yeah.
All right. So question, this comes up on a fairly regular basis with bank clients that are maybe a little less sophisticated.
Sure.
True or false? Operating agreements are not necessary.
So there's two, it depends, right? So that's a classic,
typical attorney.
Classic legal answer, right? So not legally required in the state of Florida. The Florida Revised Limited Liability Statute is a very good one. We are lucky enough to have some very good basic foundational rules in the state of Florida. However, you have the ability to modify most of those things. And if you are trying to set up a true partnership, if you are trying to set up even a family type of business, it's always good to put into play the actual details of what you've agreed to, because oftentimes people have in their heads, what they think a business is and what they think the partnership is. And until you've spoken about it and gone through that process, you really don't know all the details that you necessarily need to make a business successful. So I always recommend it. Again, that might be one that they're not ready to hear at the outset. Unfortunately, a lot of times people will wait till there's a problem, which is not a recipe for success, because at that point, the damage has been done and it's kind of hard to go back to a written agreement at that stage. But I always recommend it. And maybe it's not the Magna Carta of legal documents, and maybe it's not the supreme end-all be-all of operating agreements that I would like to see, but I always say get something in writing versus just referring back to statute.
And probably more important when it's not a single member LLC.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're really dealing with a true type of partnership relationship, and I don't care if you've known the person for 20 years, I'm not, setting anybody up for failure or, trying to add animosity or adversity into their relationship. People have different beliefs. We, you and I are definitely married. We understand that we walk in and don't necessarily mean to upset our wives with the words that we say. And certainly we've done that a number of times. But business partners, it's the same way, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like, how much have we communicated? I might know you to be a buddy for 20 years. We've never been in business together. We've never, had to worry about money coming in. So that definitely changes people, and it's a different version of people that you haven't seen. So at least if you've set up in the beginning and asked all the reasonable questions and got people's buy-in, I think you're definitely setting yourself up for success versus, not necessarily failure, but definitely not putting your best foot forward for sure.
Well, you think about it. I mean, we mentioned marriage, but 50% of more than 50% of marriages fail. So why would partnerships be any different? It reminds me of a great quote that someone told me once upon a time, but the only ship that sinks is a partnership. No, important to kind of delineate when there are conflicts between the partners, how it's going to be resolved, right?
Yeah. I mean, and even the best partnerships, right? Life changes, right? So my wife gets a job across the country. I got to leave. What does that mean? I'm not an employee anymore, but I still want my ownership interest. So we do, full buy-sell agreements and things like that for contingencies that nobody's thinking about. Nobody is thinking about the exit plan when they're getting into a business. And that's my job to make sure that they're doing that. And again, life changes. People get sick. People, any myriad of different things can happen that are going to change your life, going to change your business, going to change that relationship. I mean, listen, I always tell everybody I litigated for 22 years. No piece of paper is going to make a bad person good, but at least you have some sort of foundational element, some sort of structure to say, okay, well, let's refer back to that. Let's look at that. Let's talk about that rather than kind of rolling the dice and running with it.
And so in this instance, going back to kind of the DIY concept. Yeah. So if we're talking about an operating agreement, probably getting an attorney involved is better than the DIY.
Yeah. I mean, my last two versions of DIY operating agreements, one is for a medical practice, and it was a 3-page operating agreement, which I'm not necessarily known for being short-winded, but, on my best day, I couldn't figure out how to put all of those details into 3 pages. And the other one was about 7 pages of utter nonsense, the DIY version. So, yeah, I definitely suggest it. I think, again, are you building this business? And listen, now doing my own firm for 4 years, I know what it is to build a business, and it's blood, sweat, and tears. And are you building on a strong foundation, or are you building on something that's pretty weak with a bunch of cracks in it? That's the way I look at it anyways.
Okay. So in terms of legal structures, is there an ideal entity or multiple entities or layers that play a role in protecting someone's assets?
Yep. So we call it the foundation plan, and there's any number of levels or modules you can add onto it. I won't get too hyper technical. One of the most common setups that we use, because Florida is one of those great states of super DIY, super easy access, but they require disclosure of managers and members, right? So typically you are disclosing online, creating a public record of who owns this thing. So more often than not, we will bring in an anonymous holding company out of a state like Wyoming. Wyoming, you are 100% in compliance with state law. We haven't done anything wrong. We're not skirting any laws. The federal government knows everything they need to know, and the state government in Wyoming, knows everything they need to know.
And just in Florida, you have to file a foreign, what do they call it, a foreign?
No, so we don't do that. So if you do the foreign business filing in Florida, you then disclose all the information you didn't want to disclose in the beginning.
Okay.
So what we have is Wyoming owns 100% of a Florida entity, and you're good to go. You've got your Florida entity. It's ready to go day one, and you can do business, and you have your Florida EIN. You can get your Florida business license. The only thing they ever see on the Secretary of State is owned by Wyoming entity. If they go up the food chain and look for something in Wyoming, they find my name. My name's not owner, it's not manager, it's not member, it's organizer. And in that state, Nevada, Wyoming, Delaware, we're allowed to file in that capacity. So that's generally a great foundation for an asset protection plan. And it gives them a great pivot point too, because that holding company can own interest in 50 other companies if you want. If you're an investor, entrepreneur, in real estate, other businesses, whatever it may be, that can be essentially your invisible shield around you for whatever you invest in.
That's me. Yeah.
And that's.
And for high wealth individuals or
really
anybody who's got some assets to protect.
Yeah, we always look at asset protection from the point of if you've got stuff that you don't want to lose, you need asset protection. And it becomes a price point, of course, right? We'll always take the super high net worth folks, but I'm also very much happy, to work with people on the upswing, right? Like we're building that foundation, we're helping you get there. And guess what? It's fun to see as they're growing and increasing their net worth and investing in different things for them to do it in a protected way. As you all know, I've represented a number of banks over the years, and I don't ever fault anybody at the front desk level at retail, right? So they're very caught up in underwriting, and they've got a certain form, and it doesn't look a certain way.
Everything's got to fit in the box.
Yeah,
right?
And that's the way it should be. That's the way the lawyers set it up for you, and that's the way they don't want everybody to have flexibility on everything. It's not an easy fit for a lot of banks because Florida is so very used to going online to some biz and seeing everything. So we have to usually take a few extra steps and say, no, you're not ever going to see it in Wyoming. That's intentionally why we did it. Here are the laws that say we don't have to do that. But here are all of the ownership documents. So really at the end of the day, once they get past kind of the initial kind of shell shock, as long as they can see the beneficial ownership information, as you all know, we've done our job. So Florida banks is definitely interesting at times. And it just all depends on who you're dealing with too.
So what types of assets need protection?
Any stuff that you don't want to lose in a lawsuit. Oftentimes what we'll look at is businesses. Real estate is really the low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. That's one of the easiest things that people, understand they can get sued for. Vehicles, whether it's your, normal everyday vehicle, personal possessions, so we can put those in trust and things like that. So it really just depends on value, not only value, externally, but value to you. Is it something that, God forbid you're in a horrible car accident, would you want to lose that as part of, some sort of collection action? And, the idea behind asset protection is to own nothing in your personal name and to control everything. We didn't create this idea. This was, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, give yourself some credit.
Yeah, no, we've refined it pretty well. Right. But we didn't create the idea. But it really is, the more you have in your personal name, the more likely you are to have some issues, right? So we can always talk about creating protection from inside and outside liability. Inside means something pertaining to that asset, something to your business, something, someone gets pissed off at the bank and they sue the bank because something the bank did. And just like my business, they can do the same thing. Most people are well protected or planned, they're planning for that instance. What they're not thinking about is something that happens irrespective or outside of that business. And now they're looking at all of your assets, which now your businesses, and you've worked your entire life to make this successful business. And if it's not protected and you're in a car accident, well, guess what? the personal injury attorneys of the world are going to do. They're going to run an asset search on you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. They're coming for it.
if you come up with, 20 hits on businesses and properties and whatever else, who's a better target? And they have to understand, I'm going to roll the dice after someone with 20 pretty viable assets or someone that comes up as a ghost. Well, the person that comes up as a ghost, I can assure you, is a far less better target. And they're not going to know what's behind that curtain until they roll the dice, get a judgment, and try to collect it, which could be years down the line. So the best opportunity to resolve any sort of claim against you is right at the outset. And the less you have in public records, the better you are right there.
Okay, be the ghost. What about insurance? So insurance right now is crazy. I mean, we know premiums are through the roof. Now, the Bank of Tampa has a lot of affluent clients, but we've got people that are coming into the bank and saying, you know what, last year I paid $3,000 for my policy. This year it's $30,000. I'm just going to pay off my mortgage. Or they're coming in and saying, okay, I want to drop wind because it's too expensive. So people are trying to find creative ways to reduce expense, but they're also possibly, reducing their coverage and putting themselves in a precarious position. So do you advise on the insurance piece as well?
So as hard as it may be to ever say, and I certainly am not supported or sponsored by any insurance company, I always say get as much insurance as you can and get an umbrella on top of that. There are certainly asset protection companies out there. We've seen them. We've seen the advertising that's saying, we do such a great job, you won't need insurance. Yeah, good luck to you. Okay.
We're suing that guy.
Yeah, that just sounds a little foreign to me. It is definitely difficult, and we've heard, especially in this last couple of years, where policies have increased. The premiums increased so high, where people are essentially almost self-insuring.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the ability to do that, maybe, but that
most people don't, right?
Yeah, most people don't. I mean, the last time I heard that story, it was a contractor that comes in for emergency remediations, and he was like, I've had so many bad times dealing with these insurance companies. I just put $250,000 in an account and let it sit there, and if anything bad happens to my house, I'm ready to go. Well, great for you. I don't know how many people are going to sit there with $250,000 in the bank just sitting on it, but I understand the issue. We always recommend get as much insurance.
As a banker, that's under the FDIC limit, so good, but maybe not the best return you can get.
Exactly. I mean, it's just bad from a lot of different perspectives. So I shouldn't say bad from a lot of different perspectives. I think unrealistic from a lot of perspectives. So, but we would still always recommend get as much insurance as you can. We do work with the brokers to make sure the policies are set up right. I'm certainly not, any sort of, a risk management expert or anything like that, but making sure that they're at least titled right and put into place right. And umbrellas is one of the things that we see that people really overlook often, and it's some of the cheapest insurance you're ever going to get.
Why do you think people overlook it? Is it just an education thing? Or?
I think it is an education thing, and I think because
it's not that costly.
It's not that costly at all, and I don't know if maybe a lot of insurance brokers or agents are not selling it because it's not a high premium for them or not a high commission rate or something. I find a lot of people in Florida are just undereducated on insurance in general. So when we find
speaking of education, so we could have some listeners that are hearing umbrella and they're like, I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is. So what is an umbrella policy?
It's going to be secondary insurance, meaning that you have to file a claim first under your homeowners, your car insurance, your malpractice or errors and omissions insurance. But it's an overall secondary insurance that you can get very, very high limits for very low premium. I think mine right now is about $5 million, and I think my premium is like not even $1,000 under or something. It's
okay. I mean, yeah, very reasonable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you were talking about being a ghost, and it has the sound of maybe being on the borderline of legally acceptable or ethically acceptable. I mean, can you kind of talk how you walk that line? And
yeah. It's always very interesting, and I think there are many attorneys that even think that the term asset protection is somehow a bad thing or like we're doing something fraudulent. I can assure you my license has been intact in 2 different states for now going on total of over 24 years, and I'm not risking my license for anything. So these are a number of strategies that have been borne out over time and seeing the litigation pitfalls and seeing what happens in court and things like that. We're not ever telling anybody to lie. It's a question of timing a lot of times.
Just tell them I don't remember.
I do not recall is much more acceptable, or I plead the fifth is much more acceptable. No, but I mean, it's really a question of timing when it comes to litigation, right? So what we know for sure, and we have this conversation with clients all the time, listen, if something is a fraudulent transfer, meaning it was transferred to avoid this specific claim coming, they're going to have to make that claim. We don't want you to do anything when you're in the midst of danger, but there are still options at that point, but you run much higher risk. If you've done this 5-10 years ahead of time and then danger comes, there's not even remotely any chance of something.
So timing is really key. Get the structure in beforehand.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
If litigation should arise, are there any instances where you can move your assets to try to protect them? Because I can tell. I have multiple stories, and you and I did a lot of work together during the great financial crisis. But one in particular comes to mind where one of our borrowers had a lot of his assets in a trust and changed the beneficiary from himself to his wife. And said, these aren't mine. I don't have control over the assets. I can't do anything about it. But so that's fraudulent conveyance in one aspect.
Yeah. So ideally, we're not ever advising a client to do anything last minute like that. Clients a lot of times will engage in some self-help remedies that way. But
see, more DIY, man.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like a question of, we see all the time, well, we know that single member LLCs in the state of Florida could have potential liability. So I'll throw on my mom, my sister. And it's like these indications that generally a good litigator is going to know is done for no other purpose than to try to avoid what I'm, trying to come at you for. So those types of things are usually not all that successful, but it becomes a timing thing again. What we know for sure is if you have zero asset protection and the creditor claim comes, all those assets are up for grabs. So doing something within the bounds of the law, right? So we can change title to assets. We can put an irrevocable trust in. We can bring another LLC in. These are, stepping blocks or different modules we can put in, or we call it peeling back the layers of the onion, that are going to get you protection. Well, they might be anticipating a claim now in 2023, talking about it, threatening it. That claim might not come for another year. And then you're in litigation for another 3. Like, okay, well, I did something 3 years ago now, and yeah, go try to unwind it. And if you've done it smart, you've done it the right way, there's really no problem there. So, and it's a combination of estate planning too. You're always, allowed under law to protect your assets for your family and for, future generations.
So do you work with estate planning too, or do you bring in someone else? You bring in a partner to do that?
Yeah, so that would be my partner. Michelangelo Mortellaro is a co-founder of Fortress Asset.
Man, that's an Italian name, huh?
Yeah, he's definitely very Italian.
Does he have like a good nickname too, like Tommy Cutlets for the Giants?
He does not have a nickname like that, but he does have a good one, and I don't know that he wants me to share it necessarily. But
he helps with the estate planning.
Yeah, he's done nothing but estate planning. He came straight out of law school, a very entrepreneurial guy. Respect him. Of course, we're partners. But he's done nothing but estate planning. Does elder law, asset protection, and things like that, Medicaid asset protection. So he was familiar with some of the concepts, but had never really worked with the business attorney until we got together. So really the combination of Fortress is the combination of both of our law firms together and what we do. And, his law firm crushes it for estate planning. So.
And I know he's a TikTok star too, right?
Yeah.
Just like yourself.
He's a little bit better than me.
So are there situations where asset protection strategies aren't effective?
Going back to kind of the last minute stuff, right? So if, number one, if it's a DIY thing and, you've got the account set up and someone's trying to garnish an account and you try to throw on, a girlfriend or something right last minute, those are things that are pretty easy to see and pretty easy to weed out if we're, the prosecuting attorney trying to come after that. If we're the creditor's attorney coming after it, I can see that like, a deer in the headlights. It's pretty clear on what you've done. So we can pretty much usually always unwind that. There are certainly times where we get calls, that we certainly refuse them. We've had some crazy call, I'm about to go through a divorce and I need to hide everything. I'm like, good luck to you, buddy. That's not the way it's going to work. And there are firms out there advertising asset protection for divorce. Well, here's the way it works. Because listen, I like money. I like a successful business. That sounds very appealing to us. And we're like, so we went and talked to our divorce attorney friends. They're like, well, here's the way that works. You hide it. And if it was a marital asset, they're going to find a way to claw it back. And even if it's offshore, right? So we do offshore asset protection too. Technically, that's beyond the jurisdiction of the court. Well, guess what the court does have jurisdiction over? You.
Yep.
And they're going to say, okay, well, now you're in contempt until you bring that money back over here. So,
we need to do a whole episode on just divorce law and assets and divorce, because for whatever reason, I mean, when people get divorced, one of the first places they go to, well, number one, they don't want to give us a personal financial statement, which is, I can't help you. Sorry. If I don't know what your assets are, I can't help you. And then secondarily, they want financing at a period of time that there's no transparency and there's no certainty. Like what's the divorce agreement going to look like? What are your assets going to be afterwards? Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned maybe there's a little bit of a story there. Do you have any other good stories that were, either successful asset protection strategies or maybe some that, not necessarily that you did, but that were not successful?
We have endless amounts of unsuccessful, or what we would say is not a recipe for success the way they were set up. Unfortunately, and not to bash any of our colleagues in the Tampa Bay market, but we've seen people, especially estate planning attorneys, hold themselves out to be asset protection attorneys. We had very recently, at a much higher price point, someone sell asset protection for the family's commercial property valued at about $5 million. And when we looked at it, we cringed. So what they did was they took that property, conveyed it out of the LLC that it was in, which was probably the safest mechanism for it, and transferred that property into a revocable living trust. A revocable living trust provides zero asset protection and is commonly the bucket that you are putting everything else into to avoid probate. So not only do you not have asset protection for that asset, you've now given them a bigger bucket to get at if there's ever any issue. And as we know, commercial building, you've got renters, you've got people coming on to visit those renters. Liability will come at a certain point in time. So rental properties, the last we had, a lovely lady, this is one of my favorite stories because it ended well. Very successful entrepreneur, by all accounts, had her asset protection set up for the most part 15, 20 years ago, owned 2 very successful car dealerships out in California. Okay. Started visiting Florida, loved Florida. Started buying.
It's a trend. We get a lot of California coming in.
Absolutely. So the land of fruits and nuts is having some issues out there. So, but Florida, we're doing okay. Loved it. Started coming here and started buying a property like there's no tomorrow. Well, she is protected because she's got an irrevocable trust, a family limited partnership, things that were set up 20 years ago. So her individual assets were all protected. And when we first started telling her what risks she was at, she looked at us kind of like we were snake oil salesmen. And thankfully, after...
you do that too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's only generally on Thursdays. So today's Wednesday, so we're pretty good.
Okay.
All right. Any of it. Now, she had 14 properties in one LLC. And we tell her,
nope.
Clearly this is going to be some risk exposure here, right? At the end of the day, you're putting 14 different assets, income-producing liability assets, into one bucket. And it was a very hard pitch. Now, listen, if you want to do 14 separate LLCs, you want to use land trust, you want to group them together by equity in the property, whatever you want, we're there to help you. And I'm not here to tell any of my clients it must be this, it must be that. I'm there to present the risk exposure, and you make the decision. Well, she essentially looked at us like we were selling, all these services that were unnecessary and didn't believe us. Well, follow-up email later that week. She had done her research. She came back, and for sure she understood the risk exposure that she had, but she had never had that conversation with anybody.
Okay, so that she just didn't understand. Yeah. It wasn't a function of, because I know when you're looking at okay, I've got 14 different LLCs I need to establish. I'm going to pay a fortune for my accountant. So it's, your penny, what is it?
Penny wise and pound foolish.
Yes, right.
No, I mean, and I don't even really use that term in that regard, honestly, because at the end of the day, I'm not dealing with the logistics, right? So, I mean, oftentimes people go into sensory overload. Oh, I'm going to need 14 LLCs. No, I'm going to tell you that's the most protective, but you make the decision, right? So a lot of times what we'll do with folks is, okay, listen, if I lose any money, it's a bad day. But what's a really, really bad day for you? So if we can group a couple of these rental properties together and maybe create a little bucket that's never going to hit more than $500,000. So we start allocating the properties, whatever their risk exposure is, or, where they are on that spectrum, we can set it up for them. I certainly understand, speaking from the attorney standpoint, it always makes more sense to us to keep everything as segregated as possible. That's the way I personally do it. I'm also not paying for my legal fees. I get it. But, that's a lot for a lot of people. They don't want 14 different bank accounts. So, there's a number of other resolutions we can do. We can do one management company. Have your own private management company. Have all your tenants paying into one. Put the money in through that and then filter it back into those LLCs. Use land trusts that are great asset protection tool in the state of Florida. That's on title to each one of your properties. It doesn't have to be renewed every year through the state of Florida. You don't need operating documents, and you can have one LLC own all those land trusts. So like a bunch of different options.
And so what I'm hearing again is expertise is important. DIY is maybe not the best strategy.
Yeah.
One last question. So are there any potential future trends or changes in asset protection strategies, any legislation that's coming down the pike that may force you to change the way the best structure is?
So no, it generally improves, right? So we generally get more options as time goes by, and we're constantly on the lookout for, we use a trust out of Nevada, which, we use a licensed product from the guy that helped pass that statute for an asset protection trust in Nevada. We have offshore protections, and we're constantly developing that product to make sure it's the latest and greatest, according to law. I think the biggest misconception coming is the Corporate Transparency Act that goes into effect this new year.
Tell us about that.
I get clients all the time that are super freaked out. Are we going to be in compliance? I'm going to get fined $500 a day for not complying. Am I going to lose all my anonymity because we have to report ownership info? You have to report ownership info into a government database, just like you do anytime you get an EIN. That's the way it's been since we've started doing this work. And someone's name is always tied to this company. And what the federal government is trying to do is avoid money laundering and terrorist financing, things like that.
And they
no problem.
Yes.
They're going to get there.
Uncle Sam wants their cut.
And that form is not available anywhere in a public database. So I have clients over the last 6 months that were like, absolutely freaked out. Am I going to lose all this anonymity? Absolutely not. It's another form, just like what we do when we
all this anonymity I just paid for. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't reading the law. We just lost it. Day 2. Yep. Thanks for the check. It's all gone now. No, it's reporting the same information into a government database that you do when you get your EINs anyways. It's no different. It's not going to be discoverable. It's not going to be open and available to the public. It's for the government to know. Now, there are some other options to avoid corporate transparency when you're dealing with offshore things, and we have those solutions for some people, but that's a whole different ball of wax. And at the end of the day, the people that are coming to us looking to avoid the IRS and avoid, the government in any way different, that they're probably the clients that we're turning down 9 times out of 10. There was this thing called the Panama Papers. We're not messing with any of that. And the government's going to figure out, the government's going to get their tax money and all that. All we are trying to do is come up with better tax planning strategies and, eliminate as much liability for you as
do the right thing, follow the law.
Yeah.
So, Jason, if people want to find you, where can they find you at? What's your TikTok handle, so everybody knows?
My TikTok handle is @bizattorney, B-I-Z attorney.
Man, you sniped that one.
Yeah, it was a pretty good one, right? Yeah. I was pretty happy. And I think, a little bit late to the game with TikTok. And all of our socials are kind of tied in together too through Fortress Asset Protection, Venerable Law. Venerable Law, we have our lovely corporate headquarters, only office in South Tampa. So pretty easy to track down. We're doing consults, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Not too many consults on Sunday. That was just a joke. So
don't reach out to them on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, you can. You probably just won't get me on the phone.
Yeah. Well, I can say I have. Not saying anybody else would. Thank you for answering for me. But so, Jason Sampson, thank you for coming on Money Market. If you have a question or a future show idea or would like to be a sponsor, you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram @Bank of Tampa and online @bankoftampa.com. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following. And until next time, adios.